How did it come to this? I only wanted one night of freedom, but instead, I came home to divorce papers served at my own front door. Can a single ultimatum really destroy everything, or was he always planning to turn my own game against me? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and disappointment. I stood at the granite counter, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles had gone white, while Grant sat at our breakfast table pretending to read the newspaper. The silence between us felt thick enough to cut with a knife. "I'm going to stay at my mum's tonight," I announced, my voice sharper than I intended. "Lila needs me right now. She's going through a rough patch." Grant looked up from his paper, those steady brown eyes of his meeting mine with an expression I couldn't quite read. After 12 years of marriage, you'd think I'd know every look on my husband's face, but lately, he'd become a stranger to me. "It's Wednesday night, Mireille," he said quietly. "Sadie has that school presentation tomorrow morning. She's been practicing for weeks." I felt my jaw clench. There he went again, making me feel guilty for wanting just one night to myself. One night to feel like Mireille Gresham, not just Grant's wife or Sadie's mother, but me. The woman I used to be before I got trapped in this suburban prison of routine and responsibility. "She'll be fine. You can handle one morning without me." I turned back to my phone, scrolling through the messages I'd been exchanging with Joel all afternoon. Each text from him made my heart race in a way Grant's presence hadn't in years. "That's not the point," Grant said, folding his newspaper with deliberate precision. "Your mum lives 20 minutes away. Why do you need to sleep over?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. I could feel my face getting hot, the way it always did when I was caught in a lie. Not that I was lying exactly. Lila did need support. She'd been complaining about her arthritis again, and her loneliness since Dad passed. The fact that I planned to meet Joel at the Lantern first was just a detour. Because she's my mother, Grant, because sometimes family needs you to be there physically, not just emotionally. I slammed my coffee mug down harder than necessary, and the sharp crack echoed through our pristine kitchen. "God, when did you become so controlling?" Grant's face remained infuriatingly calm. "I'm not being controlling. I'm asking a reasonable question about why my wife needs to spend the night away from home on a school night." "Your wife?" The words came out like a snarl. "Your wife? I have a name, Grant. I'm a person with my own needs and desires. I'm not just some possession you keep in this house." He stood up slowly, all 6 feet of him unfolding from the chair with that careful deliberation that had once seemed thoughtful, but now just felt condescending. "I never said you were, but we have responsibilities. We have a daughter who depends on us." "And what about what I depend on? What about what I need?" I could hear my voice getting higher, more desperate, but I couldn't stop myself. "I work 40 hours a week in that soul-crushing HR office. I come home and cook dinner. I help with homework, I do laundry, I clean this house. When do I get to live for me?" Grant's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I thought he might understand. "Mir, if you need time for yourself, we can talk about it. Maybe you could take a weekend trip with your mum, or we could arrange for more date nights, or—" "No." I cut him off, my heart pounding. "I don't want to negotiate for my freedom like I'm asking for an allowance. I'm 32 years old, Grant. I shouldn't have to get permission to spend one night with my mother." The truth was, I'd already made plans. Joel would be finishing his shift at the Lantern around 11, and we'd talked about getting coffee afterward. Just coffee, I'd told myself, though the way he looked at me when I stopped by the pub last week suggested he had other ideas. The attention felt like oxygen after years of suffocating in this house. "I'm not asking you to get permission," Grant said carefully. "I'm asking you to consider our family's needs alongside your own." "Our family's needs," I repeated mockingly. "What about my needs, Grant? When was the last time you asked what I needed? When was the last time you made me feel wanted, or desired, or even noticed?" Something flickered across his face then. Hurt maybe, or recognition. But it was gone too quickly for me to be sure. "I notice you," he said quietly. "No, you don't. You notice what I do for you and Sadie. You notice when dinner's late or when the laundry isn't folded, but you don't see me." I felt tears threatening, but I pushed them back. I wouldn't let him make me the emotional one again. "Joel sees me." The name slipped out before I could stop it. Grant's entire body went still. "Who's Joel?" My phone buzzed in my hand, and I glanced down to see another message from Joel. "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful." The words sent a thrill through me even as my stomach dropped at Grant's question. "He's a friend, someone who actually listens to me when I talk. A friend you've never mentioned. I don't have to report every conversation I have to you, Grant. That's exactly the kind of controlling behavior I'm talking about." But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. The guilt was eating at me, but so was the resentment. Why should I feel guilty for having someone in my life who made me feel alive again? Grant had had 12 years to make me feel special, and he'd chosen routine and responsibility instead. "Where did you meet this friend?" Grant's voice had gone very quiet, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd started yelling. "At work, he does contract work for our building. Maintenance stuff." Another lie, but a small one. Joel did work at the Lantern, which was in the same complex as my office building. "The point is, I shouldn't have to justify having friends to you." Grant sat back down heavily, and for the first time in months he looked tired. Really tired, like the weight of our marriage was finally showing on his face. "Mireille, if you're unhappy—" "I am unhappy," I interrupted. "I've been unhappy for years, Grant. And tonight, I'm going to do something that makes me happy for once. I'm going to spend time with people who actually want my company. And if I say no?" The question surprised me. In 12 years of marriage, Grant had never put his foot down about anything. He was the accommodating one, the peacemaker, the one who bent over backward to avoid conflict. The fact that he was even considering telling me no felt like a betrayal. "Then I'll file for divorce." The words came out of my mouth before I'd fully formed the thought, but once they were out there, hanging in the air between us, I realized I meant them. I was tired of feeling trapped, tired of feeling invisible, tired of living a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Grant stared at me for a long moment, his face completely unreadable. "Is that really what you want?" he asked finally. "What I want is a husband who supports me instead of interrogating me. What I want is a marriage where I don't have to fight for basic respect." I grabbed my purse from the counter, my hands shaking with adrenaline. "I'm staying at my mother's tonight. We can talk about this tomorrow." "Mireille," but I was already heading for the door. I heard Sadie's voice from upstairs, calling down to ask if everything was okay, and my heart clenched. But I couldn't stop now. I couldn't keep living this half-life, pretending to be satisfied with crumbs when Joel was offering me a feast of attention and desire. I slammed the front door behind me and sat in my car for a moment, my heart racing. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Looking forward to seeing you tonight, honey. I made up the guest room." Another buzz, this one from Joel. "Hey gorgeous, still on for tonight?" I stared at both messages, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. But then I thought about Grant's face, the way he'd questioned me like I was a child, asking for permission instead of a grown woman making her own choices. I texted Joel back, "Absolutely. Can't wait." Then I started the car and drove toward the Lantern, toward Joel, toward whatever came next. Behind me, the house I'd called home for 8 years grew smaller in my rearview mirror, and I didn't look back. The Lantern was exactly the kind of place Grant would hate: dim lighting, sticky floors, and the kind of crowd that drank to forget rather than to celebrate. But as I pushed through the heavy wooden door, breathing in the familiar smell of beer and possibility, I felt more alive than I had in years. Joel was behind the bar, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoo that snaked around his forearm. When he saw me, his face lit up with the kind of smile that made my knees weak. This was what I'd been missing, this feeling of being wanted, of being the center of someone's attention. "There's my favorite customer," he called out, already reaching for the wine glass he knew I preferred. "You look incredible tonight." I'd changed clothes 3 times before leaving the house, finally settling on the black dress that had been hanging in my closet with the tag still on. Grant had never even noticed when I bought it, but Joel noticed everything. The way I'd curled my hair, the perfume I'd chosen, the fact that I'd worn heels even though they killed my feet. "Thanks," I said, sliding onto the bar stool directly in front of him. I needed to hear that. "Rough day?" He poured my wine with a flourish, his fingers brushing mine as he handed me the glass. "Rough marriage," I said, then immediately felt guilty for the admission. But Joel's expression was so understanding, so sympathetic, that the guilt faded quickly. "Want to talk about it?" And I did. For the next 2 hours, as Joel worked and I nursed my wine, I told him everything. How Grant had questioned my plans, how he'd made me feel like a prisoner in my own life, how he'd never once asked what I needed or wanted. Joel listened with the kind of attention Grant hadn't given me in years, nodding at the right moments, asking thoughtful questions, making me feel heard and understood. "He sounds like he takes you for granted," Joel said during a brief lull in customers. "A woman like you should be worshipped, not controlled." The words sent a warm flush through my entire body. When was the last time Grant had made me feel worshipped? When was the last time he'd looked at me the way Joel was looking at me now, like I was the most fascinating person in the room? "I keep telling myself it's normal," I said, taking another sip of wine, "that all marriages go through rough patches, but I'm starting to think this isn't a patch, it's just what we are now." "Maybe," Joel said, leaning closer across the bar, "or maybe you're just with the wrong person." My phone buzzed on the bar between us, a text from Grant. "Sadie's asking for you. Are you okay?" I stared at the message, feeling the familiar tug of guilt and responsibility. But then Joel's hand covered mine, warm and callousing from years of bartending, and the guilt faded. "You don't have to answer that right now," he said softly. "Tonight is about you." I turned the phone face down and smiled at him. "You're right. Tonight is about me." The bar started to empty out around 11, and Joel began his closing routine. I watched him work, admiring the efficient way he moved, the confidence in his gestures. Everything about him was so different from Grant. Where my husband was careful and methodical, Joel was spontaneous and passionate. Where Grant planned every detail, Joel lived in the moment. "So," he said as he wiped down the bar one final time, "what happens now? Back to Mummy's house for a wholesome sleepover?" There was something in his tone, a challenge maybe, or an invitation. I thought about my mother's guest room, with its floral wallpaper and single bed, about the lies I'd told to get here, about the choice that was suddenly spread out before me like a map of 2 different futures. "Actually," I heard myself say, "I was hoping you might have a better idea." Joel's smile was slow and devastating. "I might have a few suggestions." An hour later, I was sitting on his couch in his small apartment above a convenience store, a glass of wine in my hand and his arm around my shoulders. The place was nothing like the home Grant and I had built together. No family photos, no carefully coordinated furniture, no evidence of the kind of settled, responsible life I'd been living for the past 12 years. "This is nice," I said, settling deeper into his embrace. "Peaceful. No demanding husbands, no guilt trips about family obligations." Joel agreed, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "Just us." My phone, which I'd silenced but couldn't bring myself to turn off completely, lit up with another message. This time it was from my mother. "Honey, are you coming tonight? It's getting late and I'm worried." The reality of my situation hit me like a cold splash of water. I was supposed to be at my mother's house. Grant thought I was at my mother's house. My mother thought I was coming to her house. Instead, I was here, in Joel's apartment, with his arm around me and wine on my breath, and a choice to make that would change everything. I should probably, I started, but Joel's lips found my neck, and the words died in my throat. Should probably what? He murmured against my skin. Go back to your life of obligations and expectations. Go back to a man who doesn't appreciate what he has. His hands were in my hair now, and I was melting into him, into this feeling of being desired and wanted and chosen. When was the last time Grant had touched me like this? When was the last time he'd made me feel like I was irresistible? I told my mom I was coming, I whispered, but even as I said it, I was turning toward Joel, not away. So, text her, he said simply. Tell her you'll see her tomorrow instead. It was that easy, or at least Joel made it seem that easy. I picked up my phone with shaking fingers and typed out a quick message to my mother. Sorry, running really late. Mind if I come by tomorrow instead? Something came up with a friend who needed me. Not entirely a lie, I told myself. Joel was a friend, and he did need me, or at least he wanted me, which was more than I could say for my husband. My mother's response came back quickly. Of course, honey, everything okay? Everything's fine, I typed back. Better than fine, actually. Talk tomorrow. Then I sent Grant a message too, just to cover my bases. At Mom's, going to bed early. See you tomorrow. I turned the phone face down on Joel's coffee table and looked at him. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between admiration and concern. No regrets, he asked. I thought about Grant, probably sitting in our living room right now, maybe wondering why I'd seemed so angry, so desperate to get away. I thought about Sadie, asleep in her bed with her school presentation notes scattered on her desk. I thought about the life I'd built, the promises I'd made, the person I used to be before I became so angry and resentful and trapped. But then Joel's hand found my face, and he was looking at me like I was precious, like I was worth fighting for, like I was enough exactly as I was. No regrets, I said, and meant it. What happened next felt inevitable, like the conclusion to a story that had been building for months. Joel's apartment became a world outside of time, outside of consequences, outside of the life where I was Grant's wife and Sadie's mother, and nothing more. Here, I was just Mireille, desired and desirable, alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Afterward, as I lay in Joel's arms listening to his steady breathing, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. My phone sat silent on the coffee table, no demanding texts from Grant, no guilt trips about missed bedtime stories or forgotten responsibilities. Just silence, and Joel's warmth, and the feeling that I'd finally chosen myself. I must have dozed, because the next thing I knew, grey morning light was filtering through Joel's blinds, and my phone was buzzing insistently on the coffee table. Grant, I muttered, reaching for it with one arm while trying not to wake Joel. But it wasn't Grant. It was my mother, and the message made my blood run cold. Honey, Grant just called looking for you. He said you never made it here last night. Where are you? I'm worried sick. I sat up so fast I made Joel stir. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through my messages, seeing 3 missed calls from Grant and 2 from my mother, all from the past hour. Shit, I whispered. What's wrong? Joel's voice was thick with sleep. Grant called my mum. He knows I wasn't there. Joel propped himself up on one elbow, suddenly more awake. What are you going to tell him? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to tell him? That I'd lied? That I'd spent the night with another man? That our marriage was over in every way that mattered? Or was I going to lie again, dig myself deeper, pretend that this had been some kind of misunderstanding? My phone buzzed with another message, this one from Grant. We need to talk tonight. Just 5 words, but something in them made my stomach clench with dread. Grant wasn't a dramatic person, wasn't given to ultimatums or confrontations. If he was demanding we talk, it meant he knew. Somehow he knew. I have to go home, I said, already reaching for my clothes. Joel watched me dress with an expression I couldn't read. Mireille, what are we doing here? Is this just a one-time thing, or… I paused in the middle of pulling on my dress. What were we doing? Last night had felt like the beginning of something, like the first step toward a different kind of life. But in the harsh light of morning, with Grant's messages burning in my phone and my mother's worry weighing on my conscience, it felt more like the end of everything I'd built. I don't know, I said honestly. I need to figure out what's happening at home first. Joel nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Call me, he said, when you figure it out. I kissed him goodbye, tasting wine and regret on his lips, and walked out into the morning light. The drive home felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life, my mind racing through possible explanations, possible excuses, possible ways to salvage what was left of my marriage. But as I pulled into our driveway and saw Grant's car still there, he should have been at work by now, I realized that salvage might not be an option anymore. The game had changed, and I wasn't sure I knew the rules. The house felt different when I walked through the front door, like the air itself had shifted in my absence. Grant was sitting at the kitchen table, with his laptop open, and a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. He looked up when I entered, and the expression on his face made my stomach drop. He knew. I could see it in his eyes, in the careful way he closed the laptop, in the deliberate calmness of his posture. Somehow my careful, methodical husband had figured it out. "Good morning," he said, his voice neutral. "How's your mother?" The question was a trap, and we both knew it. I could double down on the lie, pretend I'd actually spent the night at Lila's, and hope he didn't push too hard. Or I could come clean and face whatever consequences were waiting for me. "She's fine," I said, setting my purse down with hands that shook slightly. "Why aren't you at work?" "I called in sick." Grant stood up slowly, and I noticed he was still wearing yesterday's clothes, like he hadn't slept at all. "Funny thing, your mother called me this morning. She was worried because you never showed up last night." The words hit me like a physical blow. Of course she'd called him. Of course my careful web of lies had unraveled the moment someone actually tried to verify my story. "There was a misunderstanding," I said quickly. "I ended up staying with a different friend. I should have called to let everyone know, but…" "What friend?" Grant's voice remained infuriatingly calm. "Just a friend from work. She was having a crisis and needed someone to talk to." "What's her name?" Another trap. If I gave him a name, he could verify it. If I didn't, he'd know I was lying. "Does it matter?" I snapped, my defensiveness flaring up to cover my panic. "Since when do you interrogate me about every person in my life? Since you started lying to me about where you spend your nights?" The accusation hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. I felt my face flush hot, the way it always did when I was caught. "I'm not lying," I said, but even to my own ears, the words sounded hollow. Grant reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he pulled up something that made my blood freeze, a screenshot of a social media post from the Lantern's official page, dated last night. And there, in the background of a photo showcasing their Wine Wednesday special, was a figure that looked unmistakably like me sitting at the bar. "The Lantern isn't your mother's house," Grant said quietly, "and it's not a female co-worker's apartment." I stared at the photo, my mind racing. How had he even found this? Grant barely used social media, rarely went looking for things online unless he had a specific reason. "I stopped by there for one drink," I said desperately, "before going to help my friend. It's not what you think." "What do I think, Mireille?" The question was so simple, but I couldn't answer it. Because what he thought was exactly what had happened, and we both knew it. "Where's Sadie?" I asked instead, suddenly realizing the house was too quiet. "At my mother's. I dropped her off this morning after you didn't come home." Grant's voice carried a weight of disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. "I told her you weren't feeling well." The thought of my 6-year-old daughter being shuffled off to her grandmother's because of my choices made me feel sick. But I pushed the guilt down, focusing instead on the anger that was easier to manage. So you're punishing me by taking my daughter away. I'm protecting her from having to witness whatever this conversation turns into. Grant sat back down, and the weariness in his posture made him look older than his 35 years. Mireille, I know about Joel. The name hit me like a slap. My legs went weak, and I had to grab the back of a chair to steady myself. How? Does it matter how? Grant's calm was finally cracking, showing flashes of the hurt underneath. What matters is that you lied to me, you lied to your mother, and you spent the night with another man. It's not what you think, I said again, but the words felt useless. Then tell me what it is. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I say? That Joel made me feel alive in a way Grant hadn't in years. That I was drowning in our suburban life and Joel felt like oxygen. That I'd been emotionally checked out of our marriage for months, and last night was just the physical manifestation of what had already happened in my heart. All of it was true, but none of it would make this better. I've been unhappy, I said finally. I've been unhappy for a long time, Grant, and you never noticed. You never asked. You just assumed that as long as the house was clean and dinner was on the table and Sadie's homework was done, everything was fine. So you decided to have an affair. It's not an affair. It was one night where I felt like myself instead of just your wife or Sadie's mother. Grant laughed, but there was no humor in it. One night, with a man you've been texting for weeks. My heart stopped. How do you... Your phone bill, Mireille. Hundreds of texts to the same number over the past month. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? I sank into the chair, the full scope of my exposure finally hitting me. He didn't just suspect. He had evidence, proof, a paper trail of my betrayal laid out in black and white. I want a divorce. The words came out of my mouth before I'd fully formed the thought, but once they were out there, I realized they were true. This marriage was over, had been over for months, maybe years. Last night with Joel had just made it official. Grant stared at me for a long moment. Is that really what you want? Yes, I said, my voice growing stronger. I want a divorce. I want out of this marriage, out of this life where I feel like I'm suffocating every single day. And Sadie? We'll figure out custody. Plenty of people co-parent successfully. Grant nodded slowly, like he was processing information rather than having his heart broken. Okay. The simple acceptance caught me off guard. I'd expected him to fight, to beg me to reconsider, to promise he'd change. Instead, he just sat there looking tired and sad and resigned. Okay, I repeated. If that's what you want, then okay. I'll call a lawyer today. Something about his easy capitulation made me angry. After 12 years of marriage, after building a life together, after having a child together, he was just going to give up. Just like that. Don't you want to fight for us? I demanded. Don't you want to try to work things out? Grant looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Do you? The question hung in the air between us. Did I want to work things out? Did I want to go to counseling and hash through our problems and try to rebuild what we'd lost? Did I want to give up Joel and the way he made me feel and go back to being the invisible wife and mother I'd been for so long? No, I said quietly. I don't. Then there's nothing to fight for. The finality in his voice was devastating. This was really happening. My marriage was really over, ended not with a dramatic fight or a moment of passion, but with this quiet, sad conversation in our kitchen while our daughter was safely tucked away at her grandmother's house. I'll stay at my mother's while we figure out the logistics, I said, trying to sound practical and mature instead of terrified. That's probably best. I went upstairs to pack a bag, moving through our bedroom like a stranger. Everything looked the same. The bed we'd shared for 8 years, the dresser covered with photos of happier times, the closet full of clothes for a life I was about to leave behind. but it all felt foreign now, like artifacts from someone else's existence. As I packed, I could hear Grant on the phone downstairs, his voice too low for me to make out the words. Calling his lawyer, probably. Or his mother. Or his brother Eli, who'd never liked me much anyway, and would probably be relieved to hear we were splitting up. My phone buzzed with a text from Joel. "How did it go? Are you okay?" I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to answer. Was I okay? My marriage was over, my daughter was confused and displaced, my mother was about to get the shock of her life when I showed up on her doorstep with a suitcase and a story about how my life had imploded overnight. But underneath all the chaos and uncertainty, there was something else, a sense of relief, maybe even freedom. For the first time in years, I was making choices based on what I wanted instead of what was expected of me. "It's over," I texted back. "I'm getting divorced." "I'm sorry," came his immediate reply. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Was I sure? 24 hours ago, I'd been a married suburban mom with a routine and a mortgage and a life that looked perfect from the outside. Now I was about to be a single mother starting over at 32, with no clear plan and no safety net except my mother's spare bedroom. But I thought about the way Joel had looked at me last night, the way he'd made me feel seen and desired and alive. I thought about the possibility of a different kind of life, one where I wasn't constantly suffocating under the weight of other people's expectations. "I'm sure," I typed back. Downstairs, I found Grant exactly where I'd left him, sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in his hands. He looked up when I appeared with my suitcase. "I'll call you about Sadie," I said. "She's going to need an explanation. We'll figure something out, something age-appropriate." Grant nodded, then stood up. For a moment, I thought he might try to hug me goodbye, or say something meaningful about our 12 years together. Instead, he just looked at me with those steady brown eyes that had once made me feel safe and loved. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Mireille." The words weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They were just final. I walked out of our house for the second time in 2 days, but this time I knew I wasn't coming back. This time, the life I was leaving behind wasn't just temporarily abandoned, it was over. As I drove toward my mother's house, my phone rang. Joel's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," I answered. "Hey yourself. How are you holding up?" "I'm okay. Scared, but okay." "Want some company tonight? I could bring dinner, a bottle of wine." I thought about my mother's questions, her shock when I told her what had happened, the inevitable lecture about commitment and marriage and thinking of Sadie. Then I thought about Joel's smile, his hands, the way he made me feel like the most important person in the world. "That sounds perfect," I said, because if I was going to blow up my life, I might as well do it thoroughly. 3 weeks later, I was learning that freedom came with a price tag I hadn't anticipated. My mother's guest room, which had seemed like a temporary haven, now felt like a prison of floral wallpaper and passive-aggressive comments about thinking things through and what's best for Sadie. Every morning brought a new lecture disguised as concern. Every evening, another pointed question about my friend Joel and whether I was really thinking this through. "I just don't understand, honey," Lila said for the 100th time as we sat in her kitchen over coffee that had grown cold while she talked. "Grant is a good man. He provides for you. He's never raised a hand to you. He loves Sadie. What more do you want?" What more did I want? I wanted to feel alive. I wanted to feel desired. I wanted to wake up excited about my day instead of dreading another round of routine and responsibility, but explaining that to my 60-year-old mother, who'd stayed married to my father for 35 years despite his drinking and his temper and his complete inability to show affection, felt impossible. "I want to be happy, Mom." "Happiness is a choice, Mireille. It's not something someone else gives you." The irony wasn't lost on me that I was getting relationship advice from a woman whose marriage had been held together by stubbornness and social expectations rather than love. But I bit my tongue because I needed her spare bedroom and her grudging support, at least until I figured out what came next. My phone buzzed with a text from Grant. "Sadie's recital is Thursday at 7. Will you be there?" I stared at the message, guilt twisting in my stomach. In the chaos of the separation, I'd completely forgotten about Sadie's piano recital. She'd been practicing for months, excited to show off the piece she'd learned. Now she was living between two houses, confused about why Mommy and Daddy weren't together anymore, trying to navigate a world that had been turned upside down by my choices. "Of course," I texted back. "I wouldn't miss it." But even as I typed the words, I was calculating. Joel had asked me to meet him Thursday night for dinner at a new restaurant across town. I'd have to choose between my daughter's recital and the man who made me feel like myself again. The choice should have been obvious, but the fact that I was even considering it scared me. Another text, this one from Joel. "Miss you, beautiful. Can't wait to see you tonight." We'd been seeing each other regularly since I'd moved out, stolen hours between his work shifts and my awkward visits with Sadie. But it was getting harder to coordinate, harder to find time and space for whatever we were building together. Joel was starting to make comments about wanting more, about me getting my own place, about what our relationship would look like once the divorce was final. The problem was, I wasn't sure I knew what I wanted our relationship to look like. In the immediate aftermath of leaving Grant, Joel had felt like salvation, like proof that I'd made the right choice. But now, living in my mother's spare room and fighting with lawyers over custody arrangements and property division, the reality of my situation was setting in. I was 32 years old, starting over with no savings account of my own, no credit in my name, no plan beyond not being married to Grant anymore. Joel was fun and exciting and made me feel desired, but he was also 30 years old, living in a studio apartment, working as a bartender with no clear career ambitions. Was he really the foundation I wanted to build a new life on? My phone rang, interrupting my spiral of doubt. Grant's name flashed on the screen. "Hi," I answered cautiously. Our conversations since I'd moved out had been strictly logistical. Pick-up times for Sadie, division of household items, coordination with lawyers. We were scrupulously polite with each other, like strangers conducting business. "Hi, I wanted to talk to you about Sadie." My heart clenched. "Is she okay?" "She's struggling. Her teacher called yesterday. She's been acting out in class, not paying attention, getting into fights with other kids." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. My sweet, well-behaved daughter was falling apart because of my choices, and I was sitting in my mother's kitchen worrying about my own happiness. What did the teacher say exactly? That she seems angry and distracted. She got into a shouting match with another kid yesterday over something trivial, and when the teacher tried to talk to her about it, she said she didn't care about anything anymore. I closed my eyes, picturing my 6-year-old daughter carrying around that kind of pain and confusion. "What do you think we should do?" "I think we should consider counseling. For her, and maybe for us too, to figure out how to co-parent effectively." Co-parent. The word felt strange and clinical, reducing our 12-year relationship to a business arrangement centered around our daughter's well-being. "That makes sense," I said. "Do you have someone in mind?" "I can ask around, get some recommendations." There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of traffic in the background. He was probably calling from work, stealing a moment between meetings to deal with the wreckage of our family. "Mireille," he said finally, his voice softer than it had been in weeks. "I know this is hard on all of us, but Sadie didn't choose this. Whatever problems you and I had, she shouldn't have to pay for them." The words hit their mark, sharp and true. Sadie hadn't chosen this. She'd been a happy, secure child living in a stable home, and now she was shuttling between houses, watching her parents communicate through lawyers and carefully neutral text messages. "I know," I said quietly. "I want what's best for her too. Do you? The question was gentle, but it carried an edge. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you want what's best for you. The accusation stung because it was true. I had chosen what was best for me. My happiness, my freedom, my chance to feel alive again. But wasn't I allowed to do that? Wasn't I allowed to choose myself after years of putting everyone else first? That's not fair, I said. Isn't it? You left your family for another man, Murray. You can dress it up however you want, but that's what happened. I left an unhappy marriage. Joel is the reason you left. Don't pretend this would have happened without him. I wanted to argue, to insist that my problems with Grant ran deeper than my attraction to Joel. But the truth was, I probably would have stayed in my unsatisfying marriage if I hadn't met someone who showed me what else was possible. I have to go, I said, not wanting to continue a conversation that was making me question everything I'd done. Think about what I said. About Sadie. The line went dead, leaving me alone with my guilt and my mother's disapproving presence in the next room. That evening, I met Joel at the Lantern, needing his reassurance and attention to counteract the weight of Grant's words. But even Joel seemed different lately, more distant, less focused on me when we were together. Everything okay? I asked as he mixed drinks with mechanical precision, his usual flirtatious energy notably absent. Yeah, just tired. Long day. But it felt like more than that. Over the past week, I'd noticed him checking his phone more often when we were together, being less available for impromptu meetings, seeming distracted during our conversations. Joel, I said carefully, are we okay? You seem different lately. He looked up from the drink he was making, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. Uncertainty, maybe even regret. I don't know, Mireille. This whole situation is more complicated than I thought it would be. What do you mean? I mean, when we started this, you were an unhappy married woman looking for some excitement. Now you're getting divorced, and there's a kid involved, and lawyers, and it's all very real. The words hit me like a slap. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe we should slow things down, figure out what we really want here. I stared at him, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. Joel was supposed to be my reward for leaving Grant, my proof that I'd made the right choice. If he was backing away now, what did that say about the decision that had cost me my marriage, my home, my daughter's security? I left my husband for you, I said quietly. No, Joel said, his voice gentle but firm. You left your husband for you. Don't put that on me. But as I drove back to my mother's house that night, his words echoing in my head, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd blown up my life for a man who was already having second thoughts, left a stable marriage for the promise of something that was already proving to be less substantial than I'd hoped. And my daughter was paying the price for my choices. The recital was in 2 days, and I still hadn't cancelled my dinner with Joel. But, as I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and listening to my mother's television through the thin walls, I realized that some choices were easier than others. I picked up my phone and texted Joel, "Can we reschedule Thursday? Something important came up." His response was immediate. "Sure. Everything okay?" I started to type an explanation, then deleted it, then started again, then deleted that too. Finally, I just wrote, "Family stuff. I'll call you later." Because maybe it was time to remember what really mattered.